Greetings, fellow citizens. This is Citizen Kong. Well, this is a bit of a prologue to the following Fez Night because I forgot to mention a couple things. Well, I said hello to a few people, and I forgot to mention my good friend Eileen and Grace. And I just want to thank them for their help during my last job search. And if I forgot to say thank you for the first job search 2 years ago, I want to thank you again. Appreciate it. Your help and support. Okay. Now stay tuned for the following Fez Night, which is just another crappy Fez Night. Alright. See ya. Oh! Getting old. Every time I move, I groan. Hey, check out this t-shirt, okay? I was digging down through my t-shirt drawer, and I found this, man. This is a classic. I've had this for a long time. Oh, it was funny. I was talking to Monk, and I mentioned we were talking about silk screening shirts for a little bit there. And I got this from the guy that I knew that silkscreen shirts, and he had this weird funky store, and it was called, like, him and his friends would try to name it. They ended up calling it the store that should not be, that cannot be named. The store that cannot be named. Anyway, this classic, they close in the dark too. Lon Chaney in the original, I guess it was silent version of Phantom of the Opera. Alright, I'm sure you're sick of hearing about my new job, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about my new job. Because this is a blog, or video blog, a vlog, and I talk about stuff. Talk about stuff in my life. Sometimes. All the time. That's what I do on this. Yeah. So, I don't know if I ever told you, but the day that I got hired with two other guys, and we're all about the same age. One guy's a little bit younger, by like a couple years. The very first day that we were like told to bring in our tools and sort of get started, we had to take one more welding test, but we were hired. And it was just supposedly a formality. One of the guys got fired right that day. The supervisor kind of saw something about the guy's personality, said, I don't think he's going to be a good fit here. You know, I like the guy, he's a nice guy, but he's not going to be a good fit. And then, then the middle of this last week, the other guy, so there's two of us left, the other guy got fired. Again, I've heard different things. I even talked to the guy. We were on the way home from work. I was driving home. He pulled up alongside me and started signaling to me. And I thought, is there something wrong with my car? Did I, is there something stuck on it? Or, and stopped at the light. He rolled down his window and said he just got fired. And so we went and had a talk. I said, well, let's pull over somewhere and have a talk. So he wanted to go to the Starbucks. We went to the Starbucks. Which, by the way, I do not like Starbucks. I love coffee, but I do not like to go to Starbucks. I just don't want to give them their business. There's just too many of them. I'd rather support the little small coffee houses. When I used to be able to afford to go to coffee houses, some of you know that I used to go to a local place called Twigs, and then Timmy would go there. God, I need to quit smoking. Timmy would go. I mentioned I would go to Twigs for coffee, and then he would go there to stalk me. The other thing that's weird about Starbucks, I just usually when I go there, I don't get anything fancy. None of that fancy frappuccino foo-foo stuff. Just give me a cup of the house blend, and don't leave room for milk, and I don't have it with sugar. I just drink it black. And that stuff gets me wired. I notice a big difference. It's like they spike it with caffeine. Caffeine. A cross between cocaine and caffeine. I don't know. I don't know, is it just me? Anybody else notice that? I've mentioned it to other people and they don't seem to think so. All I know is that really, when I drink Starbucks, I feel a hell of a lot more wired than on regular coffee. In fact, it's kind of a feeling I don't like. I get, my thoughts start racing and my mouth starts going like it is right now. But anyway, so I couldn't get a straight story out of the guy. I mean, when I first met the guy was hard to communicate with. There was just something about, you would say something and his response would kind of be like in what we're talking about, but there was just something about it that was like he'd missed the mark, And I mean, he was all over the place. First he said, well, one of the guys, the immediate supervisor, they had worked together before at another company and the guy hated him. And then he said something about that he couldn't read a scale, in which I was like, what? A scale? Like something you weigh things on? And he's like, it's like, no, tri-square. Tri-square? If he doesn't even know the name of the stuff, I guess he meant combination square. A ruler, a tape measure? Set of calipers? I don't know. And then he would just change the subject, and so I just feel bad for the guy. I really do. It's like Christmas is coming, and he has a kid, and ugh. Which made me even more paranoid. So when I really screwed something up this week, I mean, everything's got to be so precise. And this whole outside, I checked it for squareness, everything was great. And there was this one center leg that was off to one side by like less than 1/8 of an inch. And there was another part that was supposed to go in and it wouldn't fit. God. And I thought then and there, man, they're going to fire me. They fired these other two guys that are dropping the hat. They're going to fire me. Oh, was I stressed out. Turns out the guy, they're going to make it work. So I'm still there, Which is funny. I felt like, what am I doing here? They've put me in the area of welding where it's the most complicated, critical thing of anything they're doing currently in the plant right now. And there's other guys that have been working there longer than I have. There's only one other guy there with me on that one particular project who really, he's much, much younger than me, but he really knows his shit, And just because you're old doesn't mean you know more. I was good at what I used to do, but this is a whole nother ballgame for me. But I apparently, my resume or whatever, they must think that I'm a better candidate than the other guys that have been there longer than me. Aside from this one guy that I'm working alongside. It's just weird. So anyway, enough of that. Time to don the fez. Greetings, fellow citizens. This is Citizen Kong, and welcome to another Fez Night. Tonight's Fez Night shall be called... What was it going to be called? I wrote something down. I wrote this down and I'm like, what? Is that what I wrote down? Monk wanted to call it Oral Fez. Oral Fez Night, because I guess the last time I talked about oral sex, and I guess the time before, he said I've been talking about oral sex for the last 3 Fez Nights or something like that. But no, I think it was the time before I talked about sex in some regard, but I can't remember what it was. But no, I don't think there's going to be any talk about sex tonight. On tonight's Fez Night, which is being filmed in the morning. Or taped or recorded. I wonder if people will still use the word filmed in the future. Because I still hear people use it, even though we're not using film anymore. Oh man, I saw all kinds of rolls of 35mm film that are in my refrigerator that have been there for like probably 15 years now. I look and I go, oh, I should throw it out. It's not like I can use it anymore, but it's like, oh, 35mm film, I remember when. God, getting old. No, but I'm not going to call it Oral Fez Night. All right. Again, I doffed the fez. Now it's time to don the fez. Time to don the fez. Greetings, fellow citizens. This is Citizen Kong, and welcome to another Fez Night. Tonight's Fez Night should be called Subliminal Fez Night. So watch for the subliminal references to sex in this Fez Night. In the corner you see like, oh, an invisible hand. I'll pull something out that's really phallic. What do I have around here that's phallic? Nothing. Could a pipe be phallic? Anyway, check out this pipe. This is a weird one. I normally don't like these metal pipes, but it's a very, very dry smoke. It smokes very dry. Actually, it's a nice smoke, but I do not like this traditional modern stuff. I think it's like a Swedish pipe. It's got all these gimmicks and bells and whistles. There's like a... I can't get it apart. There's like this drain plug here. It's crazy. Subliminal Fez Night. Okay. I know whenever I say this I don't have a hell of a lot to talk to, then I go on and on and on. I would like to, and I will not use the word shout out. I probably have used that in the past, but I will no longer use that, and if I do, say something to me. I'm no longer going to use the word shout out. I rarely did before. Instead, because the shout outs, there is actually, for me, there will be no shouting involved. I'm simply going to say hello. Hello to Monk, or Mike. I'm sure that's okay, right? And Betty. And hello, Bobo McGraw. And hello, Robbie. And hello, John Cox. Hello. I made the mistake. I won't say it was a mistake because I meant to do it. I saw this interesting article about this guy's. It was an opinion piece, a column or something, about that if atheists got their way and they were able to abolish religion, the world would not be any better off. And I agreed. And boy, did that create a shitstorm. Because then one of my friends that's actually, I know this person, she's in San Diego on Facebook. She's actually a friend of my sister's. And my sister doesn't live in San Diego anymore, but her friend, who they went to school up in, I guess it's okay to say, San Luis Obispo, Cal Poly. Is that Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo? Anyway, she's on Facebook, and she reshared or whatever, shared my post on that article, and she really liked it. Her father was a Methodist minister, and I guess it's okay to say Anna is a really, really cool person. She is not some pious Bible thumper or anything like that. She's very worldly, very sophisticated. And when I mean worldly, she knows what's going on in the world, not where people use the term worldly to mean like, lives in debauchery or anything. No, she's just a very, very nice lady. And so she reposted. Then one of her friends went off. And no offense to my atheist friends, but some of you can really go on and on and on. Especially this friend of Anna's. To be honest, I didn't read any of it. I just read a little bit at the top and a little bit at the bottom. And as a joke, I talked about, but I also thought it was kind of an interesting idea, which will probably never happen. But I wrote that, mainly my main thing is that I was trying to say, one thing they called it what do they call it? A red herring or a straw man argument that the atheists want to abolish religion. Well, so many times in the arguments, doesn't it come across sounding as if the world would be better off without religion? And I still say that humans would come up with new excuses to do terrible things to each other that simply, and sure, many things are done in the name of religion. And John Cox, John said it was a catalyst. And I'd have to say, okay, I see your point, I concede it. I felt the catalyst was a little bit extreme, or a little bit taking it too far. I see it more as religion as an excuse to go to war, or as an excuse. I mean, these people, like the Spanish Inquisition, they had already, every now and then a culture goes to this thing is like, blame the immigrants. We're going through that right now in the United States. Blame the immigrants, but it's not over religious issues. It's just simply economic and social issues. And sometimes these economic and social issues are happening, and then they just put it on the religion thing. So they give God, because they're doing God's will, an excuse to do terrible things. This is my forum, okay? So I'm going to talk about my side of this. I won't go in. I don't really know what the whole thing with what happened in the USSR, but there was a state that said this is not a religious state. The religion is not going to play any role here, and still terrible things happen there. And granted, I know religion does terrible things, drives people to do terrible things, but I have to argue that also drives them to do good things. And Rob and I got into a discussion over, I was just taking the stance that there's so much in our culture, and not just Christianity, but all world's religions, whether you're Hindu or Buddhist or some of the Native American religions, where they built totem poles, that if you love art, if you love the humanities, if you love literature, there is just so much richness out there. Stonehenge, the pyramids in Latin America, the Sistine Chapel, all these things that were motivated by a belief, that wasn't based on. But it's interesting. The scientists in the beginning of early cultures, the scientists were the ministers. Ministry, philosophy, and science and religion were all as one in many, many, many cases in early civilizations. And Rob was saying that he more admires, like, the ability to build rockets and things like that, and man's technological achievements. Well, in a way, the pyramids are both. It was technological achievements driven by the idea of some religious notions. So I said, and this is what Anna's friend got really in a big huff about it. I did skim some of what he wrote, and he said, the reason why all these, you said there would be a void if religion was like taken out of the picture through all history, that that a lot of these works wouldn't happen. He said, well, new works would have happened instead. The only reason why the religion was behind it because they're the ones that had the money. And I think that's oversimplifying things. I don't think Stonehenge was really built with sort of like economic reasons. Like with Michelangelo, he was paid by merchant class and things like that. But the early stuff is more simple than that. And until you get a group of people organized around something, and they're motivated by some belief, and they're motivated, some would say, out of fear, of retribution or a bad harvest that year, and they do something. They build Stonehenge, or they build a pyramid, or the wonderful carvings and works of art. So as a kid, I grew up loving science. As a little kid, I wanted to be a science until I found out there's involved like learning calculus and stuff like that. So lazy. I have such a lazy intellect. But then later I kind of changed, and I became even more interested in literature, and then later in art. And not that I have any degrees in that, but I took a lot of art history and humanities classes, and I just see there was a value in it. I don't know whether it was on Facebook or Fez Night, I talked about, or was it in the comments section with Bowen McGraw Thomas, about the iconoclasts. As growing up a Protestant, the idea of and this is what Protestants have in common with the Jews, the whole graven image things is wrong. To bow down before an image or a painting, or a depiction of your God. The Jews never created any stone representation that's their God. And so to the iconoclasts, even a statue of Jesus, or any of that sort of stuff. They have these things that would travel from town to town called triptychs, where they'd be these panels, and they would have like images of the saints or Jesus or something on it. The people would like do, it's like a roving chapel, you know, and the peasants would like line up and kneel before this thing and pray or whatever and do their rituals. The iconoclasts were, you know, these are religious icons and then classed. They would come and destroy these things. They would smash them and destroy them, much like the Spaniards did when they invaded like Peru and Mexico. They would take a lot of their art and idols and, you know, stone figures and smash them. And as I said, when I first learned about this, I had mixed feelings about it, because I was brought up that you know, those things are wrong. I talked about my mother smashing the St. Christopher medal, and but then again, what a loss, what a crime, you know, that even if you no longer have to really believe in it, you don't have to kneel down in front of it. It's just take it for what it is, a very interesting, beautiful piece of art, you know, and the skill that went into making it. Yeah, it's a minefield, and I should know better. But I just thought, and Anna shared it, and she said this is one of the best essays I've ever, you know, and she's somebody like me that sort of walks that line between intellect and belief. And as I've said many, many times, and that's something Rob pointed out, that when I talk about the heart and the mind, he said there's a certain part of the brain that, and I can't remember, but that's the one, the brain that stimulates the religious feelings of ecstasy, or that sort of chill you see when you hear a great piece of music, and those are the examples I was using. That sort of feeling that's not based on any kind of reality. And he says, well, it's produced in the mind. Well, is it that religious people have this part of the brain that's more developed? You know, that they're more prone to feeling that? And not every person that practices religion is like that. There's a lot of people that are like robots. They just go to church and do the rituals out of fear or out of just habit, or they feel like society will condemn them or look down on them if they don't do that. In the US, we have religious freedom, so we don't feel the pressure. Not necessarily, unless you grew up in a small town with a big community, or not a big community, but a small community, and people will notice if you're not in church. Yeah, okay, there's that sort of pressure. But there's some of us, and I feel I'm one of them, and I feel they must be in the majority, that actually feel something about their belief, that actually feel you can't prove it, there's no evidence of it, that it's something that you feel. There's no scientific basis to it, unless you go with the route that there's part of your brain, and I know they've done brain scans on monks, like Buddhist monks, meditating, or I think there was a case where there was even, they took a nun who had like these really strong things, and they did a brain scan on her, and they saw activity in that certain part of the brain. So is that a sign of mental illness? Does that mean that there's something wrong with that person, or does it mean that they're higher functioning on some level? I'm sure the ASA would say there's something wrong with them, but there seems to be more of those people than the rest, right? So wouldn't that make it closer to the norm? I mean, if we're just doing psychology is a lot about statistics, and sure, you can say that nobody is normal, you know, but what happens is you create a spectrum. And that's just the way it is for everything. Not everybody fits perfectly in the spectrum. There are, when you do enough statistics though, you'll come up with an average, and then somewhere in the United States there's somebody that fits that criteria for everything. They even have 2.5 children. Of all things, they have half a child. It's true. Yeah, I'm kidding. So getting back to this comment, Anne's friend, who is just so damn wordy, just goes on and on and on and on. And I made this joke about my whole thing, about, you know, I said, well, you know, the void that would be left if we got rid of religious history. Let's say we were able to travel back in time and eliminate it, and then we'd see what the present would look. I think there would be a massive cultural void, and I would wonder what would fill it. I really do. Because if you go back far enough, there isn't going to be any science or technology that can fill that gap. And I really say, as religion could be a catalyst for war, I say it's also a catalyst for doing things other than just growing crops and eating and having sex, you know, and making the world safe for atheists. I made this joke once, I think it was Gordon, about like the very first atheist, and they're like, you know, these cavemen, and they're like, oh, they build this rock idol, or they're surrounding a tree, and they're like, oh, doing their chants and stuff. And this one caveman goes, I don't believe in this stuff, and the rest of them start stoning him. I know, aren't the religious people terrible? But I made this joke. Of course I wasn't serious, but I said, I have this theory that the dolphins worship a fertility deity. And then he came back with me, oh, do you have evidence? Do you have evidence of this? Or is it something you want to believe? You know? And I said, well, you didn't give me a third option, that I was joking. And then he said something about, he was like, obviously no sense of humor. You know, he wouldn't even give me that, you know? Not even a smile. But then part of me that made me think of that, I said, wouldn't it be, what would people think? What would, if we found some sort of evidence of a animal, what we would consider an animal, a sentient being, but what we consider, you know, lower down the ladder, like dolphins or chimpanzees, apes, that did some kind of ritual. If we found out they had some sort of ritual that was that was not based on their need to procreate or eat, you know, boy, would that would throw something weird into the mix, wouldn't it? That would really create a stir. Of course, we haven't found anything like that. The only thing that I ever saw that was close to that, and make of it what you will, was, do you remember that gorilla, Coco? I think it was a gorilla, an ape, that they taught her how to sign, to use sign language from an early age. I could go off on the Mandela thing, but I won't. So this ape could communicate through signing. It was fascinating. And one time somebody asked Coco, what happens to you when you die? And I don't know, I wasn't around when Coco was being raised and what influences she had. You know, someone could, you know what she said? She said, I go to some place that's warm. And so it's like Coco believed in an afterlife. Now, did somebody influence that in her? I don't know. You know, did somebody sign to her and say that there's an afterlife? You know, but in this documentary, I saw the question being asked, where do you go when you die? And Coco said, I go to somewhere where it's warm. And so, very strange. Makes you think, doesn't it? I really enjoy my conversations and debates with my friends. And you know, I love you all dearly, you know. Especially the people in my circle that will disagree on things. It will never, ever, to me, become personal. Will I ever, you know, dislike you or think any less of you. It's all about exercising our minds, exercising it's like friendly sparring, you know. Define your argument. And in some ways, it's changed me a lot. I know that I do not use, it's funny, Robbie used the notion of faith-based knowledge, which I say, he called it an oxymoron, and I don't believe there's any such thing. Knowledge is on the something tangible. Now, you could have knowledge of stories or things like that, you know, but to get in an argument with somebody that there is a God and say, no, here's your proof, and you open up a religious book, whether it be the Quran or the Bible, and say, well, here's your proof, that's just ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous. And I agree. And I don't think the only way I would have ever been like that is when I was a little kid, fully immersed in Sunday school. But I don't even, then I would have never made that argument, because you can't prove anything based on that. And yet theological, what do you say, believers believers or religious people that have arguments online with atheists tend to do this a lot, but they're the idiots. When you look at the real philosophers that argued, the big names that argued the existence of gods, they never fell back on religious text. They would try to look at their world around them and use that as the evidence, or just philosophical arguments about it. Questions of life, the big mysteries. And there was one other thing I was going to come up. They were talking about the founding fathers, people, this was a Christian nation and all that. And this was kind of new to me. I've heard this before, but I actually looked it up. A deist is what a lot of our founding fathers were, at least some of them. And that's a person that sort of believes in a higher power, but it's based on looking at what we see in nature, And I think Thomas Jefferson might have been a deist or a deist. I forgot to double check the pronunciation, but of course I didn't know I was going to mention that till right now. Maybe that's more of what I am, but I mean that word's fallen out. That was more like during that time period. I guess it was first coined in the late 1600s or something like that. Hey, I was interrupted. The timer went off on this camera. Yeah, I'm using my phone, so it does have its drawbacks. It's telling me that the dryer is finished. So hopefully I can edit this on. There'll be some sort of like jump cut probably. And, I knew I did this. I stepped on my earphone. That's a drag. Luckily I have a spare. Yeah, I tromped on these earbuds, but these are the bogus, the early versions that are kind of suck. Not that big of a deal. So anyway, maybe I could glue those back together. They still might work. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching Subliminal Fez Night. Did you see the subliminals? Let's do that again. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching Subliminal Fez Night. Have a great week. Cheers.